I'm Harry Burry, and I'm a priest of the Archdiocese of St. Paul, Minneapolis. Retired, I guess, but I find myself even more busy than before I was retired. And the neat thing about being retired is I get to do mostly what I perceive as really important and significant to do.
And I'm Rob Hahn. I'll be asking the questions. We're at St. Francis Cabrini Church in Minneapolis, and today is Tuesday, December 11th. Let's start very generically. Tell me about how you ended up at the Newman Center in Dinkytown in the mid-60s.
Well, I received a letter from the Archbishop inviting me to go there. I was assigned in 1965, and I was an associate priest. I think maybe they called us assistant priests at those times, and Father George Gerrels was the senior minister, senior priest, and Father Don Conroy was also there.
And you, I'm going to jump around here, but let's start with the music aspect. You introduced, or were instrumental, no pun intended, in developing a different type of music at the Newman Center than most Catholics were used to in the pre-Vatican II era.
Yes, well, one of the things that we noticed was that not many of the University of Minnesota students were coming to Mass, to the chapel. And so we decided to change the music in accordance with what was going on in the late 60s. And so we moved away from the organ, which incidentally was outlawed in its early days because it was played in bars. And so now we introduced the guitars and the piano and drums, and that was sort of looked down on because that also is used in bars. But the bounce, the energy of the music began to draw students, and we went from 4 masses on a weekend to 5 o'clock on Saturday, midnight on Saturday night, so people could go out on a date and then end up going to Mass before they went off to bed. 9 o'clock on Sunday morning, 10 o'clock, 11:30 upstairs and down, and 7:30 at night. So we had at least 7 masses every Sunday, and sometimes more.
How's the audio? Is it picking?
Fine.
Okay, not picking up the rubbing on the pants at all?
No.
Okay, good.
And the people really were attracted to the music, which was in some ways not sacred. It was not so much music that had to do with the vertical, between God and me, but between all of us, the horizontal. So so-called secular music, like I get by with a little help from my friends, and that kind of music really drew the students, but also helped them to see that Catholicism is really a community. People are brought to union with God through the community, and not so much just God and me.
There was one individual in particular, Cyril Paul,
Yes.
who was a big part of the new type of music. What was he like?
Oh, he was such a marvelous, marvelous fellow, fairly friendly, outgoing, marvelous smile. He played the bongo drums, and he was from the Caribbean and went through St. John's University education. And he was the one that really turned it around. It was his spirit that made all the difference. And after he left, the students followed in his example. So he really paved the way for the rest of us.
And then there was the connection you had with John Denver.
Oh yes, John was kind enough to, through Bill Carlson and Nancy Nelson, they suggested they'd have John over for dinner at one of their houses, and I was about $5,000 in debt for bringing people to the Paris peace talks. People that couldn't pay their own way, I just went and borrowed the money. And actually it was more than $5,000, it was $10,000. And so I had told Bill and Nancy that I didn't know I was going to pay this money back to the bank, because I was making about $100 a month. That's what priests were paid in those days. And they said, well, we'll invite him for dinner, and then you can ask him if he'd do a concert for you. And so that's what we did, and John said yes. He said he was just starting out by himself. He was no longer with the trio. And he said, I'd like to sing in the new Guthrie Theater, and if you just charge as little as you need to make it. So we charged $3 a ticket, sit anywhere you want, and we got the 10,000. And John put on a fantastic concert. And from then on, we became really good friends. And John wrote the Our Father, a new version of Our Father that we still sing it here at St. Francis Cabrini today.
Is that something that he did on his own volition, or did you talk to him about it and say it would be kind of cool if you considered this?
Oh yeah, I asked him, would you be so kind? And he did, he did. And yeah, so we were good friends over the years, and I went out to Aspen and skied with him and his dear wife Annie.
When you, if I recall correctly from our previous conversation, when you came to the Newman Center, you weren't very aware of or engaged in the Vietnam War. What changed that?
Well, there was so many students that came and asked me to help them because they were conscientious objectors. That is, they didn't believe that it was God's will for them to go and kill these Vietnamese people. And so they needed a minister to help them to write a letter in their behalf saying that they were not just fearful, but that they really, in conscience, didn't believe in killing people. And so as I began to write these letters, I began to do a lot more research into the war. And the more research I did, the more I came to the conclusion that not only was the war a mistake, but immoral. And then I began to talk against the war. And then it got very clear to me that it was easy for me to talk about it, but I really needed to put my body where my mouth was, and so then I started to protest.
Now there was the day of or the day after, somewhere in that area of Kent State.
Yes.
And you and a few others did something very unique. Tell us about that.
Kent State happened on, I think, May 4th, 1970. And 4 students were shot, killed on the campus of Kent State. And then universities all over the country, the students there went on strike, and they just refused to go to class. At the University of Minnesota, it was the same thing. So many of the Catholic students came to the Newman Center. And we began to do some thinking, brainstorming, as we called it. Like, what should we do? They're not in class, and they're not in class because of the war. What should we do? And they decided that there was a protest against the ROTC building on campus where students were trained to go into the Army, the service. And the police were there and the protesters, and so we came up with the idea of wearing white armbands and going and standing between the students and the police so that there wouldn't be any violence. So that's what we began to do. And then as we met and continued the brainstorming, we came up with the idea that the students would go out and knock on doors and ask people how they felt about the Vietnam War. And then in the evening they came back and reported that most people were against it. So we thought, well, what can we do? And then a French professor suggested that she would go, at the university, suggested she would go to Paris and ask the Vietnamese who were in the peace talks what would they like. And she came back and reported that they would like it if we could find 20 or 30 people who were not well-known anti-war activists, but ordinary people who thought the war was immoral. And so we started looking for people to do that. And we found about 10 who could pay their own way, and about 10 who could pay some, and about 10 who, more or less, who couldn't pay anything, like some people from the Native Americans, for example. They didn't have any money, but we really would like someone from the Sioux tribe or the Chippewa tribe or somebody like that be in our delegation. So we had these 30 people, and we didn't have enough money, so that's when I went and borrowed the $10,000. And so we all went to Paris and spoke with the Vietnamese and came up with a booklet that we wrote on how to get out of the war.
Going back to the Kent State Day protest, what were your feelings walking in between the students and the police? Was there any sense of fear, dread, or did you just feel that this was the right thing to do and you were going to do it?
That's such a good question, Rob. I must confess there was a certain amount of defying in me. I was at a point now in my conscience where I began to think that we needed to defy what the government was doing. So it was a standing up, so to speak. So there wasn't much fear. Now maybe because I trusted the police, that I didn't think they would hurt us, and I didn't expect the students to throw rocks at us. So fear was not high on the agenda.
And approximately how many people were with you as part of that group?
Over a dozen.
And how long were you there?
Periodically throughout the day, as long as the police and the students were there, we were there.
Let's talk about the mood of Dinkytown in the time that you were there, 65 through 70. It's been called, I think, from late 50s, early 70s, the intellectual capital of the Midwest. What was it about Dinkytown that made it so unique, in your opinion?
Well, it was, first of all, a place where students went to shop and to eat off campus and to discuss the major issues of the day. So it drew, and it was the bookstore that really drew people. It was kind of like the center. People loved to go to the bookstore and discuss issues there. But there also were a couple, there was a film, a movie theater, and they showed a lot of brilliant films from outside the country, and therefore films that were at least considered anti-war, pro-peace. So it was an area where people were able to talk to strangers, where one didn't have to be afraid that in just talking to somebody you didn't know, people would be suspect. Sometimes people nowadays in a lot of places, if one is overly friendly, people think there's something that you want or that you're trying to get away from them or something. But there was never that spirit. It was always a spirit of oh, is it ever nice to know some new person? So it was very friendly in that way. And that was very similar to Berkeley. Berkeley was that way too. I remember riding my bike all over Berkeley as I did in Dinkytown, and nobody honked at you. Not me, huh? They wouldn't honk at bike riders. And if you drove your car and a car before you, in front of you, stopped to talk to somebody they knew, persons would just wait. They wouldn't honk. They could finish their conversation and then drive on. So it was a sort of an atmosphere of people were not so much in a hurry, that being in the present, in the now, was powerful. It was rich, and that's what was worthwhile. You can always do something else later, but now is what's important. And Dinkytown was like that.
In addition to the Vietnam, there was the Civil Rights Movement as well.
Yes.
How did the two coexist, and what did you see in terms of diversity in Dinkytown, civil rights actions, protests, things along those lines?
Unfortunately, there were still not a lot of people of color at the university. So, in Dinkytown, we didn't see many either. There were some students on campus, but not enough so that they had any kind of collective power, which was too bad. And I wasn't aware of it enough. The Civil Rights Act had just been passed, and it hadn't really developed and it hadn't grown at the university. So we had few people of color that came to Mass, Catholics. So it didn't seem to be a big issue in our work for social justice.
There was one black individual known as the Walker. Do you remember him? Phil Holland, I think. He would walk around in a suit and tie and dispense different points of advice.
Yes. I never got to know him, but of course I heard about him a lot. Yeah, but I never met him personally.
Okay. Let's talk about some other individuals and your relationship with them through the Newman Center in Dinkytown. Senator Eugene McCarthy.
Well, Senator Eugene McCarthy was a friend of George Gerald's, the fellow that was the head of the Newman Center. And so periodically he would show up in the evening, like about 9:30 or so. And we kept a bottle of Jack Daniels for him because that's what he liked to drink. So he'd have a drink, and his co-worker, Jerry, forget his last name now, but he would come with him. So the two of them would show up, and we would talk politics till almost midnight. And it was in our upper room, wonderful little table that we sat around, had a drink, and enjoyed learning about politics and getting Senator McCarthy's views on things. So when he decided to run for president, of course, I became a big pusher of his, supporter of him, and was terribly disappointed when he lost.
Dick Gregory was another person who visited the Newman Center.
Oh, Dick Gregory was a joy. We brought him to the Newman Center, and because he was so important and significant, we couldn't have the talk at the Newman, so we had it at the barn at the university's basketball court. And he was wonderful, and he told one joke that was both realistic and also made us all laugh. He said, when I arrived here in Minneapolis, I mean, they couldn't have treated me any better. They picked me up in a limousine and they took me to the best hotel, and everybody waited on me and treated me like I was a vice president or something. So they seem to like the Negroes, but they hate the Indians. And he was right on. I mean, that was unfortunately the situation, and we're just now beginning to see how badly we have treated the Aboriginous people.
Let's go back to Berkeley. You spent a summer there, so-called Summer of Love. In addition to what you described earlier, how would you compare Berkeley to Dinkytown? Is it fair to make the comparison that Dinkytown was the Midwest equivalent or something close to it?
Yes and no. Yes, in that sense that the spirit that I described of people being very friendly, outgoing, intellectual, interesting. They had tables all over the front of the student union. There must have been 50, 60 tables run by all kinds of different organizations with their literature. And one could go after class and stop and talk, argue if you want, with all these student groups and organizations, which were on the radical side. And that was fantastic. And that spirit was also to be found in Dinkytown, but it was not as large. I mean, Berkeley is a huge place, and the university is, the two universities are at that time were pretty close. But the free speech movement Berkeley was known for, and that hadn't quite happened yet at the University of Minnesota, so it seemed a little bit more free.
If I recall, you came into contact, maybe even became friends with Joan Baez while you were there.
Yes.
And what's she like?
Well, she was an inspiration to me. I went to her Institute for the Study of Nonviolence in Carmel Valley, and she ran this institute in which she trained people in nonviolence, and not her so much, but her staff. But I remember the weekend that I was there to be trained, to learn more, at the time that I was studying in Berkeley, she gave a concert on Friday night, which I attended, and was the first concert I'd ever been at, outside concert with young people, and I was blown away by the way they would be throwing frisbees at the concert, and at the same time her voice and her message was struck me deep into my heart. And then the next day, and going to the meeting, she was there, and it's inevitable that she and I would get into a, well, not an argument, but at least questionable. And she was coming down pretty hard on hippies. And I tried to say that maybe hippies are the future of our country in one way, because they were really coming down on this idea that you needed to get to work at 8 o'clock in the morning and work until the work was done, and living with watches and time being the most precious thing in the world and that sort of thing. And the hippies were not believing in all that kind of thing. They were sort of living in the now and appreciating the precious. So they didn't wear watches, and the women didn't shave their legs, and they didn't wear shorts but long dresses, and so there was this difference, and they didn't think that work was the most important thing, and for Americans that's really important. So that upset a lot of people. So I was saying maybe that's the future, that we're going to come to a time when there won't be enough jobs for everybody. And so we need to think about other things that we might do that make life meaningful. Well, Joan agreed that maybe in the future that'd be okay. But right now, we need these hippies to be active in stopping this bloomin' war. And so I had to agree with that.
Let's go back to Dinkytown, then we can wrap up quickly. As you look back on your, about 5.5 years there, how did Dinkytown most impact you during that time?
Well, I liked the idea that it was one step from the campus, and I could meet with people who were not Catholic, who were Jewish and secularists and practicing other religions, and we were all on the same level. That somebody was better than anybody else. It was an acceptance, an appreciation of one another. And so the collar didn't make me holier or better than anybody else. And the same with anybody else, because they were professors didn't mean that they were better. In the classroom, people, and I suppose rightly so, looked up to the professor. But in Dinkytown, it was a leveling that was so democratic that it was appreciative. And so people were accepted for who they were and what they thought, and while we argued and didn't agree on everything, it wasn't like today when people argue, they tend to come down on the person they're arguing with. But there, it seemed like we, to use the phrase maybe too often, we agreed to disagree, and that we perceived that we could learn from somebody who thought differently. Today, I find that people, if they don't come into a conversation with the idea that I could learn from the other person. It's more what I can tell you, and teach you. But there was a sort of opportunity for people to be open and willing to listen, consider what the other has to say, and maybe learn something I hadn't known before. And that was really nice.
Let's circle back to your comment about the bookstore. Is that the McCosh bookstore you're referring to?
I believe so.
Okay, and do you remember anything about the proprietor, Melvin McCosh?
I didn't know Melvin, but there was another gentleman there that was a high anti-war person whose name I can't think of right
Okay.
now.
What am I forgetting to ask about Dinkytown, your time there, that you want to add?
It was wonderful. I miss it. I really miss that spirit. And I know there are a lot of people that look down on the 60s. I was thinking of it as a terrible time. I think it was a time of amazing growth. A growth not only intellectually, but also spiritually and emotionally. It was an opportunity to grow up and to meet people in a way that I could learn from them. And I really miss it.